Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Einstein, none of them could live without classical music. Nietzsche even wrote, without music, life would be a mistake. Which is a bit dramatic, but for the past 6 months, I have been obsessed with classical music myself, and honestly, he's right. For the longest time though, I couldn't understand why it had such a remarkable effect, until one day while bored, I just picked up this book on mythology and accidentally discovered the ultimate meaning of music. That might be the most pretentious statement on YouTube. Nevertheless, I do think I found the answer as to how and why music was such a irrational source of inspiration and sanity for the hyper-rational Einsteins or Nietzsches of our world, which might seem strange given that Nietzsche went mad, so to understand it, we must first start with the yin and yang. However, before we do, I would like to first ground us in a concrete musical example. This is the well-known Masquerade Suites waltz movement from the composer Khachaturian. A lot of words in that sentence. It is brilliant and powerful, of course, but we're only going to focus on the main motif here for a second. We, simply speaking, as you can hear, have the strings and the brass in a clash, trying to outdo each other. The strings go, the brass replies, the strings, the brass, and the strings, the strings, the strings, till they join in ecstasy and harmony. And that's it. Keep that in mind. Onto the yin and yang. To grasp the meaning of music, one must first accept that our human reality is fundamentally divided into two: the yin and yang. This is a primordial way of understanding human existence all throughout history, and one we still hold today, whether we know it or not. The yin and yang basically represents the fundamental split of total unity into polar opposites, so like masculine and feminine. The yin represents chaos itself, it is the unknown, whereas yang represents order or what is known. Yin is nature and the irrational, yang is culture and the rational. You get the idea. Crucially, this separation is inseparable from consciousness. In other words, consciousness is what splits reality. It is psychological. Existence itself, whatever that is the eternal harmonious ebb and flow of the yin and yang, and our reality is the split in between. Countless creation myths, the stories about how human existence started, in essence depict this fundamental split of unity, or in our terms, the fall from heaven. Thus begins the endless human toil of escape, redemption, or reunion, the struggle towards the once known perfection that subconsciously permeates so many of our enterprises here on Earth. I think music is the ultimate attempt at such a reunification of being, and the Masquerade Waltz is a bold example of precisely such attempt, or at the very least, the portrayal of it. So now that we understand the meaning of the yin and yang, we can also understand the power of classical music. The greatest musicians recreate that paradisal place of complete harmony and unity. Music is transcendental because it reconnects our consciousness, our individual center, with the whole, with the closest expression of perfection we can create. Music encapsulates our experience of being. It grows from the infinite chaos of sounds, which, with the help of a consciousness, gets organized into patterns which interact with each other in harmony and extending its perfection to the heavens. Maybe that's why we call geniuses giants. What I find so cool about classical music is that it is in itself inherently disinterested. Classical music doesn't care, it doesn't want anything, which is almost the polar opposite of us humans. Honestly, I have no idea what people mean when they say something is objective, but the greatest romantic compositions is the closest I ever felt to interacting with something objective. With music, you step away from the subjective here and now into the objective everywhere and always, or in other words, a harmony beyond the rational. The most powerful rational consciousness grounded in a relationship with this ultimate irrational is not only the definition of music, but I think also the source of human genius. Yet this is only half the answer, because most people wouldn't call Nietzsche the most balanced guy out there even if he was inspired by the profound harmony of music. So what kind of relationship with the irrational am I talking of here? We can again look for the answer in music, specifically in the Romantic era composers, because I think they portrayed it better than anyone. At the forefront, there's Frédéric Chopin, whose piano was soft, delicate, and fragile, just like his personality and health, sadly. He's probably the kind of romantic that most people would stereotypically think of, but then there's this guy, Russian composer Sergei Rachmaninoff, famous for, his large hands. When I listen to his Prelude No. 2, which he composed at 19, I hear a resentful and hopeless frustration, such an unrivaled ability, right? And yet, what of it, he asks. Then there's the Austrian Franz Schubert, who in his short 41 years composed, well, everything, I suppose. He died mostly unknown and had only one proper concert in his lifetime, probably one of the biggest what-ifs in classical music. Then there's the eccentric French Erich, who took on different personas in life and eventually drank himself to death, yet composed such beautiful droplets of perfection as Gymnopédie No. 1. Then contrast that to the grandiose ballet master Tchaikovsky, who as a person could not be more opposite from his work, apparently suffering from extreme self-doubt and depression. But wait, why are the romantic geniuses creating this paradise of music also so tragic? Well, it's good you asked. I just wanted to talk about that. Any true art is not simply an imitation of Eden. It is born out of the tension that resonates back to that fundamental split we talked about before. Classical music embraces the primordial struggle of a seemingly futile and to an untrained eye even meaningless striving towards beauty, perfection, and harmony, whereas the medieval man understood it, the mirroring of the divine image in each of us. Yet the Romantics got that perfection is not only goodness or order. That would only be one half of the yin and yang. No, our lives and thus music too are grounded in chaos. Our human existence stuck in eternal struggle between the two is the tragedy of beauty. We all play a part in the manifestation of beauty, yet we also pay the price with pain. I think about it like this: the closer a composition reaches this beauty in itself, the more painful and terrifying it is to bear, because by entering our consciousness, it immediately is doomed to temporality, to limitations. And also, it becomes a double-edged sword that heightens the contrast between what goodness and beauty is possible and how things really are. Thus, human perfection is not flawlessness, but the dance of the limited with the limitless. To give some form to what I've been saying, let's take Liszt's Liebestraum No. 3. You might think it's such a relaxing piece. Where could be the tension there? Well, there's just a single moment, a second, which pulls at my heartstrings every time I hear it and gives away the human, inescapably terrifying part of nearing perfection. Let me play a snippet and see if you notice it. Did you hear it? That ta-da! It's that momentary hesitation or slip during one of the most beautiful piano climbs in history. That is why I said perfection is not flawlessness, because this flaw, this ta-da, is what makes it perfect. So anyway, the primordial pain, tension, terrification, which I think is a word, arises in contrast to harmony due to our inherent imperfection and limitation. Mythologically speaking, from having split the world into two, good and evil and so on, and the necessary overcoming of fear and guilt in order to redeem or reunite it again, also known as the hero's journey. This is the kind of relationship to the world that is embodied in classical music. It is not only what makes people geniuses, because symbolically speaking, I think Nietzsche and many others like him, without this relationship, would simply be mad. But it also makes each of us the best we could possibly be. A hero is an archetypal idea as old as humanity. Basically, a hero is an individual that willingly steps out of the safety of the tribe, castle, or culture and journeys into the lands unknown to defeat, rescue, sometimes lead, but in essence, rejuvenate the kingdom, which could mean themselves or literally a civilization. It depends on the scale of the hero. In other words, the hero is on the narrowest path possible in the middle of yin and yang. I think the real hero of music is the melody because it carries the composition. In other words, it is the center around which everything else falls into harmony. The melody makes everything else comprehensible in relationship to it. What I think we forgot these days is that we carry the melody. The hero is all of us in our fullest realized potential. If only we dared to follow that melody. Yet this journey is perilous by definition, and many more fail than succeed, but symbolically speaking, I think we wouldn't even get off the ground without this relationship to the irrational, trying to reach the intellectual heights that someone as troubled as Nietzsche still managed to. Look, I used Nietzsche only as the boldest example of this idea of harmony because the tallest trees get the fiercest wind and make the biggest falls. In other words, they need the deepest roots to the irrational to balance out their rational heights. But especially in our times, this goes for all of us. The relationship between you and the world should not be one of subjugation, but rather of mastery. Not in a tyrannical use of the word, but more so like a chess master. See, in chess there are strict and seemingly arbitrary rules that one must follow to play. The powerful consciousness of the chess masters allows them to have almost full predictability at the very beginning of the game, but eventually they stumble upon a position that has never been played, and they just have to go with the endless possibilities that arise and try to make the best of them in the short time frame that they have to play. What makes the best players masters is not their knowledge of moves per se, but their unmatched conscious adaptation to the arising chaos. And well, is that not the definition of genius and why they love classical music?